Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out. This is video games and the appreciation thereof. I just wanted to use thereof at the end. I thought it would be fun. So let's hop into it, I suppose. So how many people here have played a video game ever in their life? Me. Okay. How many people have seen a video game ever in their life? If you're blind, I apologize. How many people have heard a video game? Okay, so you've played a video game, or you've seen it, or you've heard it, or something like that, so you have to have had some opinion about a video game at some point in your life. Particularly something that is very common if you go on the internet, where everybody's super friendly, is a bunch of heavy opinions about video games that they've either played or they've seen, and for some reason they've already formulated an opinion. So is there anybody here who has seen a game and said, I don't like it, I don't like the way it looks? All right, well, I got a splicing for you, so I don't like it. That's one thing. Anybody else who's seen something like a movie or a game, doesn't really matter, and said, it looks terrible? All right. Cool, or maybe, it sucks. Maybe you haven't seen it. Maybe you just heard it sucks. These are all things that are said from time to time, depending upon, because we're all opinionated people, we're all entitled to our own opinion and our own preferences and sort of subjective, assumptions about games and things like that. But what I want you to do is I want you to stop, okay? I want you to stop for now. Leave your subjective sort of, perspectives at the door. We're going to be looking at video games in an objective light. So we're going to be appreciating them, and appreciation, like what is appreciation? You appreciate when somebody gives you a small gift. You appreciate when your day is going well and your luck hasn't changed. You can appreciate even something, like art. You can appreciate art. And basically what appreciation is you take it in for full value. So good and the bad, doesn't matter, you take in the expression, you understand it. So, art is one thing, but video games as art, well, let's take a look at it. Let's see exactly what we think about when we think about video games. So, I want somebody here to maybe answer a question for me. Do you think video games are art?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. What makes them art? Anybody, what makes them art? What? That they're subjective. That's one thing. Somebody else? Melissa? What? They have art in it? Yeah, they have pictures.
Every rendered frame, like artist rendition.
Its own little portrait. Yeah, that is very true.
They sometimes tell stories.
The narrative.
Yeah, so you've got visuals. You've got game mechanics. It was kind of like a subjective, can cover this sort of thing, but game mechanics is definitely a part of how they're art. You experience them, you interact with them. They have narrative, they have stories or purpose, they have the expression, the subjectiveness of it. And they've got audio, they've got sound, they've got something else that you can experience. So it's a multifaceted piece of art. It's not just a portrait, it's not just music, it's not just sounds or toying around with something. It's experiencing all of these sensories in sort of like one mushed up ball that's just delivered for you. And all of these things pour into one thing called design. And so with design, it really is where the appreciation for games comes in. So when you're going to say that a game sucks, when you're going to say that it looks terrible, when you're going to say anything bad at all about a game, I want you to kind of try to take a step back from whatever you think, whatever you hold against the game, and just try to experience it objectively in its components, in its visuals, in its game mechanics, in its narrative, in its audio. You can observe that these things are done poorly, or these things are done kind of half-assedly, or perfectly, or any of that sort of thing, but just take them at face value and sort of compile them objectively, then apply your opinion on top. So when you say it sucks, you'll be able to back it up to somebody instead of just, oh, it sucks, I didn't like it, I don't really know why, I just didn't like it. You can figure out why you didn't like it. So with that, let's do a little experiment in design here. So who all heard of Pac-Man? most people, you know. So Pac-Man is a really good game, really addictive, was released in 1980. I don't know the exact month, I don't know the exact date, I wasn't alive. But it was released in 1980, and it was released to like massive sales, and it spawned a bunch of spin-offs, and there were even games where it like lost all signs of it being Pac-Man ever, aside from him being a yellow orb that was kind of fat and kind of stupid. So we'll take a look at quick gameplay element of Pac-Man here, and I want everybody to just kind of drink it in for a second, because I'm going to ask you a few questions about it afterwards. So let's say you're at a friend's house and they have an awesome Pac-Man arcade machine, and you're totally all in this, going to play it, and then suddenly, shit, the sound. Fuck, all the sound's gone. What the shit? What exactly is going on? How would you identify this? If you had never experienced Pac-Man before, had no sound, how would you form an opinion about what's going on screen, if you're doing well, if, you know, anything is actually clicking with you, if you're winning, or all of that sort of thing? Can you just get like a few people to shout out what you see that's changing that indicates and feeds back to you that you're doing well in this game?
Points going away.
All right, dots are going away, points are going up, your score's going up.
He hasn't died.
Yeah, he hasn't died yet, but you don't know if he can die yet because he hasn't run into anything. But if you ran into a ghost, yeah, probably he'd die. You have these things that are chasing you, and then when you grab the bigger dots, they turn blue, and you can suddenly eat them, and they go back to the corner, the little center section, and spawn back out. So Pac-Man is a very unique kind of look into retro game design because it got a lot of things right in terms of conveying to you feedback, visually, audibly, and in gameplay mechanics too, because when you think about it, if you've ever played Pac-Man or seen it played, he keeps going, and then he hits the wall, and he just stays there until you move him in any direction. So anybody who's looking at a joystick has to think, there's got to be something that maybe does this and moves him in a direction. And so there's kind of no way you can approach this game and not know how to play it. Let's take another look at Pac-Man real quick. I think I probably got it up and running properly. So yeah, there we go. All right, looks good. And fuck, no, all the visuals. Why? Gotta replace those connectors. So what do you hear? Yeah, you hear a bunch of that. You hear a change. There's a sudden change in what's going on. It's not that woo-woo anymore. It's a bunch of, like, what sounds like digital crying almost. What I would describe as digital tears. So you've got all of these different noises coming at you, but how do you make sense of any of it? Well, this is a consistent noise. This is the noise that you start with. So that must mean it's kind of a safe noise. You can think of it as sort of like this is an identifier for what you're doing right. You can hear the waka waka everywhere. And, I mean, you probably can't get very far in Pac-Man if you play without visuals, but if you play with sound, you can still know sort of what you're doing right, and you can know that you've entered into, like, a secondary kind of phase, and something else is happening. So, all right, well, we got it. I mean, we almost had it working, so maybe we can just get it working this time. All right, let's see how it all comes together. There it is, the Waka Waka, him moving constantly. When he doesn't run over dots, it doesn't make the waka sound, so obviously it has some inclination, sort of incentive for you to go over the dots. You get the big dot, and all the ghosts turn blue, and you just start eating them, and 400, bunch of random arbitrary numbers popping out. That must be good, right? Everybody loves numbers. Shit, I love numbers.
World of numbers.
You got all of these ghosts that are trying to bunch up against you, and for some reason you probably have an inclination that I probably shouldn't get too close to those ghosts if I have to eat them when I get a giant ball. So here's just one of the examples of gaming, sort of game design, and how it kind of masters this really beautiful way of bringing together audio, visual, gameplay, the way that you interact with all of these things. That's enough of that. So that was Pac-Man. That was, you know, that was like on the timeline, it was like way over here, probably. You had a bunch of stuff. You've had improvement in controls since then. It's been over 2 decades. You've had improvement in engines, game engines. They always used to scrap everything from a game and rebuild it entirely for the most part, and like up to the 90s and into the, I think, like 2000s. Some people were still doing that. Some people still do it just for fun. You've had improvement in graphics and in graphics processors in ways that technology can kind of enable better pixelation, polygons, and sort of that like handling of meshes and whatever else. And on that note, I mean, you've had hardware improvements. You've got like 8 gigs of RAM in an Xbox One or in a PS4, and you've got like 64 gigs of RAM that you can put in a PC if you really want to. Whereas you used to have like, I think 64K was enough for you back in the 90s or something, right? I believe. So what do all these things lead up to, and how is it handled in modern games? Well, it's handled kind of the same. I mean, they just kind of throw stuff together and see if it works, but there's a little bit more of the technique that's needed now because you have new dimensions. You have 3 dimensions. Pac-Man only had 2. You have more memory, more storage. You can make more of a game. People expect more from a game, so you have to add extra content and find new ways to keep people engaged because nobody wants to play Miss Pac-Man 3 or Pac-Man Jr. or like all of these other games that are just knockoffs of the previous ones. People want something new, even though Hollywood gets away with it for some reason all the time. So let's take a look at a game that's more modern, and we'll see exactly how game design and sort of all of these elements come together differently in modern games. All right, so note there's clearly a difference. So here you've got a cinematic sequence to establish the start of this section of the game. You've got a camera angle that's pointing down towards this giant door right there, which you can use to side. It kind of leads you over to it. The sound of footprints walking, not just a one step, it's not just digital noise anymore. This is like audio that somebody's recorded in a sound studio. You've got the wind blowing in the background, all of this ambience and atmosphere to put you there.
I get into there.
And you've got people talking. You've got characters who tell you sometimes, clue you in on what you might want to do. The sunlight coming down is a game designer sort of playing that up right there so they can point you in the right direction. Lowered walls where you can climb over. Cinematic sequences to make sure that you know that was what's supposed to happen, sort of that thing. And tiny clips just for fun.
Thank God, well.
So they got out of that cutscene and placed you right at a wall where there were ridges in it, so you could see kind of who was supposed to climb. And you can see how things that are climbable have an extra layer of light on it to let you know that it's ledge. But it still looks kind of believable. It could be on a rock wall easily. Doesn't break too much of the illusion. Have all these door paths and openings and lights and everything, and they all lead to the same place. So that was that. That was Uncharted 3. If anybody's ever interested to go pick that up or play that, it's basically like Indiana Jones. It's pretty fun. But you can kind of see how modern games have done a little bit more hand-holding in this situation. With Pac-Man, it was just sort of put a quarter in, start the game. I don't care if they know how to play or not, they're going to learn. This has a little bit more sort of subtlety and finesse to how they show you how to walk your way through the game or get through it and play through it. And even more modern games like Call of Duty, some of them rely on giving you instructions, telling you via text how you're supposed to control because we're human beings and we can read for the most part, unless you're like under 5 and then you shouldn't be playing Call of Duty. So it's just really interesting to see how this goes from Pac-Man's era and all of that mixed content to modern day, and the same mixed kind of content, just advanced in many ways, and how game design can handle that. So let's look at balance here. So in that Uncharted 3 thing, you saw there was a balance of audio to tell you where the cues were going. The gameplay mechanics themselves, if you look at a controller, it looks, my dad says it looks like a Navy jet fighter. Like only somebody who could fly that could use this controller. But it's fairly straightforward. You have two sticks and there's a directional thing here, and you just push buttons and eventually something's going to happen. So when you move around in Uncharted, it's like, all right, it's a given. You can move with this stick. And as far as gameplay is, as far as narrative goes, there were quips, there were little lines to kind of clue you in on what the purpose of your mission was. It was trying to find water. And then in general, just the visuals, the way that it showed you different things, where the door was, where the ladders were, the light, the lowered sections that you could climb over, and things like that. What happens in a game holds your hand so much, like you have barely any freedom to do anything, yet you still feel really engrossed in the experience. How could it possibly happen? It's if the developer doubles down and basically tries to over-engross you in a narrative or in a moment or something very serious. So the game I'm about to show you is called Heavy Rain. It's about a father who loses his son, and the main developer made it, or the designer, David Cage, wrote this game because he thought one day, like, what would happen if my son was in dire need of me and I needed to do something so drastic as kill somebody? What would I do for love? So he made a game based on that. And the scene you're about to see is very intense, and it's a little bit graphic, so if you have a tender tummy, please there's the door right there. I'll let you know when it's over. But we will begin with that. So you can see the game doesn't really give you freedom. You can't jump. You can't really run around too much. It only gives you a select number of objects you can interact with.
Are you prepared to suffer to save your son? You have 5 minutes to cut off the last section of one of your fingers in front of the camera. If you succeed, you will get your reward.
Cut off a finger? No way. The pain's gonna be intense. Gotta find some way to reduce it. I can't cut off my own finger. I just can't do it. I want to save Sean. I'd do anything. Anything but that.
You have 4 minutes and 30 seconds left.
kind of before he like starts screaming and blood goes everywhere and all sorts of stuff. But you get the idea pretty much. But you can kind of see how the game itself is very limited in the ways you can interact with it. You are restricted to basically the two thumbsticks, which one of them moves you around with the help of like a trigger, and the other one you push in different directions to interact with different objects. And the game, the way that it compensated for giving you such small amount of control over it was to give you more control in different aspects. So they sprinkled around different items in the room that you could select. So instead of the clippers that he went with, there are scissors, there's a saw, there's all this other stuff that you can choose to do with it. They have different options later in the game and before that even, where you can make different decisions that affect how the story plays out. So really, more of the game is based around narrative than it is around gameplay mechanics themselves. It's meant to keep you kind of engrossed in it like a movie, and honestly, some games like to do this and other games don't, and it just comes down to preference, whether or not you like to watch games more than you like to play them. But in this instance, you could see how, compared to Uncharted 3, there's not as much freedom in movement, there's not as much freedom in kind of like what you're going to do, but there is a lot of freedom in what you decide to do with your game, kind of. So you can pick out what your fate will be in this thing. Whereas with Uncharted, you crawl through like a few tunnels and you find a bunch of bad guys and you fight them and then you move on to the next section. So each game's kind of different in how it balances its elements of, you know, audio, narrative, visuals, and gameplay. With that, let me see here. Let's just review here. Any game can be appreciated, good or bad. Any of them can be appreciated. You can take it in for all that it's worth. There is always a lesson to be learned from what's appreciated. If you see bad code ever, you obviously know that you shouldn't write that kind of code. If you see a bad game, you can learn that if you ever wanted to make games, or if another developer is making games out there, they might have played that same game and said, I probably shouldn't do that. It was not well done. For instance, we should probably look at an example of one of these terrible games. I happen to have a soft spot for Sonic the Hedgehog, who was like awesome when I was a kid growing up, and now it's just awful. Everything's just been bad. So this is a game called Sonic, and it was Sonic the Hedgehog, released in 2006. It was an alpha when it was pushed out. So to be an alpha and not have really any testing behind it or anything, and be pushed out the door, there are bound to be a lot of bugs, but somehow it manages to not only be pushed out and be incomplete, it has like 36 hours of gameplay in it. It has 5 stories, 5 campaigns, and voice acting, and all of this other stuff. So somebody obviously had put it all together and then just said, we need to test it, and somebody said, no, fuck it, just out the door, now, go, get it. Like, we don't believe in quality here. So, you'll see why. This is about a 1-minute-and-30-second clip, but it demonstrates quite perfectly why this game is bad. First of all,
time for you to disappear, Iblis trigger.
There's that. There was that loading screen at the beginning, remember? And now there's a loading screen again. So it just loaded to play a tiny audio clip of a guy doing something, and then it loaded again to put you into the game. And now this camera is obviously being handled by a drunk man. And I don't even know what that is. Where is he? So you just randomly die. So imagine, this game's made for kids too. Imagine how frustrated a kid could be if they played this.
It's no use.
When there's such a small recoil time between when this boss attacks you and when you attack the boss, also you turn invisible for some reason. And here's the real kicker. There it is. Oh, no, it's no use. Oh, okay. It's trying to demoralize children, obviously, and it's going to crush you and break down your soul through all of its wonderful gameplay mechanics. The rest of this game, there is a YouTube series that's gone 100 episodes playing this game, 2 guys, and towards the end of that 100 episodes, they're like, I really don't know what to get out of this game anymore. I think we might have lost our sanity. Like, there are, like, so many episodes where they yell and scream at each other just because something happened in the game that was beyond their control. So it just goes to show you can make a game You can make it terrible, you can make it good, but you always learn something from the game that's made, or you always learn something from the games that you play, just like we learn stuff from anything that we do in like everyday life. You go and see a movie and you're like, I like that movie, I wish it had something else. That's learning something about yourself, and that's learning something about the movie, that it was lacking something. You play a bad game and you learn that it was missing some mechanics somewhere. Maybe the company does too. People use our software and find a bug or something, and they're like, I wish this wasn't there. We learned something about the product that we didn't know. So this is just part of like appreciating. This is part of seeing it. And after you've kind of taken in everything and you have all of the elements together, you can you know, just kind of form your own opinion about it, form your own subjective opinion, and have it backed by objective sort of observations that you can discuss with people and your colleagues. So that's my presentation. Are there any questions about it?
Favorite game?
Favorite game?
Yeah.
Is Grandia. It's a PlayStation 1 game. You hate it, Melissa, but I love it. It's a bad game, but I got a soft spot right here.
What do you like about it?
What?
What do you like about it?
I played it as a kid, and it's the nostalgia factor, but it came out the same time as another game, Final Fantasy VIII, which was huge. Everybody else loves Final Fantasy VIII, and nobody loves the Grandia. But I love an underdog. Hey, my man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. See, that's the faction starting up right there. But yeah, the story, in my opinion, it's very lighthearted. It's not super deep and brooding, and I wasn't super into a bunch of moody characters. Even though I was an angsty teen, I wanted something that was happier. Maybe not. I didn't watch Twilight either. Whatever. Yeah, of course.
Would you rather put up with the frustration of figuring out a game that doesn't like hold your hand at all, or like put up with a game that like just is constantly explaining to you like what to do?
I honestly think I'd rather put up with a game that doesn't explain anything at all, because at least there's exploration there. If a game holds your hand the entire time and doesn't offer anything other than holding your hand, it's not that fun. That's like having somebody sit next to you when you're programming and telling you exactly what lines to write here and there and how to solve the problem. That would suck. Yeah.
What's the most frustrating game you've ever played?
The most frustrating game I've ever played is Sonic 06. Like, that game is maddening. I decided on a whim I would play it. Actually, it's a tie between that and Superman 64. All of the Superman games are awful. You should never buy them for children if you ever have children. Unless you hate your children, you should not buy Superman games for them. I'll let you know if that changes, if they make a good one. Yeah. Do I like the best? I don't know if I have a favorite, although the Super Nintendo was my first, so it has to be somewhere up there. And I can play any of those games. I get really mad now when I play them because I'm not as good at them for some reason. I was like, I'm an adult. I should be better than a child, but I can't be like these games for children. But yeah, I'd say the Super Nintendo has probably my top ranking one. Just it has enough nostalgia factor going for it, and Mario and Donkey Kong and all this other stuff that was really big at the time that I remember. So, my favorite. Yeah, subject.
What is your game that you think is the most objectively best design? You can't find any fault with the systems, the narrative.
Objectively best design would be, I want to say The Last of Us, zombie apocalypse game that's made by Naughty Dog. Their design, as you saw in Uncharted 3, was really good. They could lead you through without you feeling completely handheld the entire time. And just the fact that The Last of Us has really solid gameplay mechanics that have already been kind of proven. They were using Uncharted 3 as a tech demo for what they were going to do in The Last of Us, so they had a bunch of nuanced features. The gameplay was tight. The gunfire was cool. They knew when to not force you into combat situations. They gave you very subtle choices of whether or not you should pick a battle here or there. And the story itself was really well written and had a great ending. So, yeah. Although that's a subjective thing for the ending. I don't know, whatever, but I personally think it's good.
It was good.
So, any other questions?
How do you feel about the current state of ports between games and systems?
Ports between games and systems? This gets into like a can of worms that I got into. I got into an infinite loop on Wednesday when I was writing this presentation up, where I was like, all right, so you can consider games, but then technically you have to consider all ports of games. You have to consider the different forms. Like if I buy Dragon's Lair as a full game box and then I go buy it on Super Nintendo, do I have to like show the same love for it or something, or can I just ignore that? In terms of ports, if they're done right, I mean, same evaluation as the other game. If they're done poorly, then that's on the developer that ported it. I don't know. The fact that they're constantly being ported, though, is mildly annoying. I don't know which version to get.
And sometimes the fact that they decide to make a game across multiple platforms makes it worse.
It's true. Yeah, it holds games back, too. So.
The port of Enemies Unknown XCOM
Is it
to
good?
the iPad is really awesome.
Good. Noted. I'll have to check it out.
Console or PC?
Console. I mean, I've built a PC. I have the rig to run games, but for some reason, I don't use it for anything other than surfing the web and the entire Adobe Creative Suite because that requires like 64 gigs of RAM.
Just have to run the right games in PC.
Yeah, that's probably true. So, yeah.
Control structures for various genres of games are much different.
Yeah, just
Weirdest thing you learned putting this together?
weirdest thing I learned putting this together. I really, really hate it when one pixel is off at the right corner of any slide. I was like, there's a tiny white dot and I need it gone. And I couldn't figure out how to get it. And then I just was like, you know what, screw it. I don't need a perfect shape, and I overextended my slide. I guess that's the weirdest thing I learned about myself. Yeah. Yeah. Keynote. Keynote is actually easily synced between your Mac and your iPhone. Sorry, it's Mac. Yeah, Denise.
What is your favorite game that you feel is most underappreciated?
The most underappreciated?
Would that be Grandia?
That one is underappreciated, but favorite game that is underappreciated would be, I want to say Journey. Journey is a game where it has random multiplayer, so you play online, but you don't get to choose who you play with. Instead, you're this lowly pilgrim that's wandering through the desert to your destination. And you'll run into random people in the desert who are exactly like you. It's other people playing the game, but they're only allowed to use one button on their controller to communicate. You can't use a microphone headset, and you can't see their gamer tag or their name or anything. So you remain nameless, and you talk to each other via just basically Morse code if you really want to. And they can either help you or they can try to hinder you in any way that they really can try. It's a very smooth game, but basically when I played that game, there weren't that many people that were very hyped about it. It's one of those artsy games that not too many, I guess, like big gamers get into. But it just had a really good experience. I met like one guy the first time I played it. We played all the way through to the end, and then when we like separated, I got a message from him that was like, "Thank you for going all the way through the game with me. It was really nice because it gives you their name at the very end if you stick with them." So it just kind of made like a really weird strangers or friends kind of vibe thing going on. So, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. An artsy game? An artsy game is a game that I define artsy, and it's my own subjective term. I mean, everybody has their own subjective term for artsy, but it's basically a game that tries something that's outside of the mold in a very big way, and they make a big deal about what's outside the mold about it. So Journey always was like, oh, you can play the game, but you'll never know who you're playing with, and you'll form this really human bond. And they had much more of a focus on humanity for the game itself than they had on the game. So it was like, this game is really about this theme, and they kept hammering away that that was what it was about. But the game was really good. I mean, they're pardoned for bragging about it, but yeah. So I guess that's kind of what my artsy definition is. So, Colleen.
Have you ever played any of the King Isle games?
I haven't. I have not played the King's Isle games. I wish the King's Isle people were here. I'd give them a piece of my mind. No, no, I'm sure that they have some qualities that are really fun, but I think most freemium games, not a big fan. Not really, they don't focus too much on the gameplay aspects. They focus on how they can hook people instead of how they can make people enjoy the game. Yeah.
Do you feel looking people are using game mechanics?
I feel it is, but it's a very dirty one, and I hate it. That's my one. I'll break that rule. I'll be subjective when I see a freemium game. Yeah, what's up?
What are you going to call your first game?
Premiums are us. I do have a game that I really want to make at some point. That basically, did anybody play Zoo Tycoon or know about it? Where you basically manage a zoo and you get all the money and you have to keep all the animals in their dens and stuff. And if you like break a cage, they get out and eat people or whatever. The game itself, I think it's boring. I think taking care of a zoo is the most boring thing ever, and I realized that when I went to a zoo and saw even the guy who was feeding lions didn't fear them anymore. I don't think he feared death. He was just that bored. So with the game itself, I wanted it to be Zoo Tycoon initially, and then you'd notice that all of your sales were dropping and plummeting, and you'd wonder why, and then a scientist would come along and say, it's because you're not exciting people. So let's start splicing as many animals as we can. And you just genetically splice this one and that one until activists start showing up at your door getting angry. So during the day, you manage a zoo and you splice animals, and at night, you fight off the hippies with those animals. So yeah, that's my game idea. If anybody wants to make it, by all means. I'd love to see it. So yeah. Any other questions?
Got a general impression of horror games?
Really good at, they focus heavily, not so much on narrative, because narrative in horror games is whatever can scare you the most, that's what we're going to do. And,
Trying to find my daughter.
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me, have you seen my daughter?
Named Cheryl, black hair.
What is it? They focus more on the visual and the audio aspect, and the gameplay controls. If you can mess up gameplay controls in a horror game, great. It'll make people so much more on edge when you can't control the game properly. So yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel that games can be a good teaching tool and/or better different things to do?
Yeah, I think games can be a very good teaching tool. It depends on how you use them, but yeah, they can be a very good teaching tool. When I was writing this, I wrote a thesis paper for this back in my senior year of college. I emailed James Paul G., who's a professor at, I don't remember what university, but he's actually published like 13 pages on games and education. And he's a huge advocate for it. And all of his sort of studies have found that if you use the right tools and the right games and you make the right mechanics and gamify the right things, you can make education super fun and even more effective than it already is. So yeah, I do believe that. Yeah, sure.
Do you believe video games cause violence in kids?
I've made a video about this. I firmly believe that violent people are violent people, and violent games shouldn't make you a violent person. My parents, when I was young, would let me play certain games with the volume all the way down, and if they had a gore off option, preferably, that's what they wanted. But if it had gore or something, they would sit me down, and this was every time they'd sit me down and say, you understand, it's just a game. You can't go around ripping people's hearts out. And I was like, I didn't know I could do that. Can I do that? Is that a thing? Do people just do that on the news all the time? Yeah, I don't believe it cause violence.
Do you think kids cause violence in video games?
I think they drive demand for it. There was a kid who walked in. I used to work at the GameStop here at the Domain, and this kid walked in, and he was about yay high, I guess maybe 8 something, and he said, I want something where everybody dies. And I had no idea how to handle that. And I was like, are you sure? You mean like a Smash Brothers? They beat them and they like go off screen and die? And he's like, no, I want to see blood and everything. And I was like, this kid is horrifying. I think it could. I think it could give them ideas. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing for like movies and books. It can give them the idea to do a lot of things, probably, if they get creative with whatever. It's like, oh, I saw Reservoir Dogs, and why is Johnny tied up on a chair? It's like, I don't know. I wasn't doing anything.
How many games of human centipede have we seen in real life?
Yeah, exactly. There it is.
As I come out,
Yeah. Any other questions? If not, then I've got recommended. For more in-depth looks, check out Statbag and his case studies. Statbag is a guy who is part of a website called normalboots.com. They do fun video game facts, but he particularly looks at the artistic value and also the case studies are examinations of games and what they're trying to tell us about the game industry or what the developer's trying to say to us. And Egoraptor and Sequelitis, it basically just compares old games to new games and sees how the generations are changing and what kind of demand for gameplay there is, and what particular mechanics are being implemented in games now that weren't then, and vice versa. And then Google, just Google anything about video games with art or video game design, and you're bound to find something super fun or somebody really opinionated, willing to fight somebody to death.
You're a video game nerd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chris. Oh, I forgot about extra credits. I've whipped this up like right before this, so I didn't get to that. Yeah, extra credits on YouTube. They also do analysis of games. They've done things like the JRPG versus the Western RPG, where they point out that it's weird that we refer to games as Japanese RPGs and just Western RPGs. So they do a lot of interesting things on what the difference in mechanics is and what the effects of certain games are on people and that sort of thing. So, good. Thanks for catching that, Chris. But yeah. So that's it. My presentation. Minutes to spare.
To the Xbox One.
Wait, we're going to admire the art of the Xbox One now. Do it.